On January 3, 2026, a blindfolded foreign president sat aboard the USS Iwo Jima, captured by American forces in an operation so audacious it defied international law. This wasn't an arrest, this was an abduction. Here's the secret behind how America actually transports a captured foreign leader. The legal foundation for this operation traces back to 1989, when Assistant Attorney General Bill Barr authored a classified opinion that redefined presidential immunity. His conclusion was stark. The UN Charter doesn't prohibit forcible abductions when America's domestic laws are violated. Foreign titles mean nothing when narcotics and terrorism cross our borders. For months before that January morning, 15,000 American troops had been quietly positioning across the Caribbean. Not since Desert Storm had America assembled such overwhelming force for a single target. The operation had a simple name: Extract 1. The mission was anything but simple. Nicolas Maduro wasn't hiding in some remote bunker. He was protected by Venezuela's military, surrounded by loyal forces, operating from fortified government facilities. Getting to him meant going through an entire nation's defenses. The Pentagon's answer was breathtaking in its scope. They would deploy 150 aircraft from bases across the Western Hemisphere. They would seize or destroy every airport within striking distance of Caracas except one. They would blockade Venezuelan waters and eliminate cartel boats that might interfere. This wasn't just capturing a man, this was temporarily conquering a country. The morning of January 3rd, pre-assault fires lit up the Venezuelan coast. Navy SEALs would later describe the precision of those 30 minutes on the ground. Insert, exchange fire, capture, extract. No American deaths, some injuries. Mission accomplished, but getting Maduro onto that warship was just the beginning of a transport protocol so classified, so methodically designed, that it represents the pinnacle of American security operations. Within hours of Maduro's capture, the real complexity began. Moving a blindfolded foreign president from a warship in international waters to a federal courthouse in Manhattan requires protocols that most Americans never imagine exist. The USS Iwo Jima became a floating fortress. Every communication channel was encrypted. Every crew member signed additional classified agreements. The ship's medical bay was converted into a secure holding facility, monitored by cameras that fed directly to the Pentagon. Maduro and his wife Celia Flores sat in separate compartments, neither knowing the other's location aboard the vessel. But the Iwo Jima was never the destination. It was a staging platform for the most sensitive prisoner transfer in modern American history. The challenge wasn't just physical security, it was legal architecture. Under 49 USC 44907, the president can ban American aircraft from operating to or from any foreign airport deemed insecure. 90 days before the operation, those notices had already been filed. Venezuelan airspace was legally off limits to civilian transport. Military transport required different approvals entirely. Navy SEAL veteran Robert O'Neill, the man who killed bin Laden, would later praise the operation's precision. Huge credit for putting strength back into peace through strength, O'Neill said. This mission comprised of 150 aircraft, and after pre-assault fires, the assault team was on deck for around 30 minutes, including the insert, exchanges, and the capture. 30 minutes to change the course of two nations, but those 30 minutes required months of legal preparation that most Americans never see. The Transportation Security Administration had been conducting threat assessments since August 2025. Under 49 USC 114, the Undersecretary for Transportation Security must notify Congress within 5 days of any determination that could affect international operations. Those notifications were filed in classified annexes that detailed the specific risks of operating near Venezuelan territory. While Maduro sat blindfolded aboard the Iwo Jima, TSA agents in New York were preparing biometric screening equipment that hadn't been used since the highest-profile terrorism cases of the early 2000s. The equipment wasn't just for identification, it was for maintaining an unbroken chain of custody from international waters to a federal holding facility. The flight from ship to shore used aircraft configurations that remained classified. What we know is this: the plane that lifted off from the Iwo Jima's deck carried not just Maduro, but a mobile command center that maintained real-time communication with the Attorney General's office. Every mile of that flight was monitored by satellites, escorted by fighters, and tracked by radar systems across 3 time zones. By the time Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was labeling the strikes imperialist aggression, Maduro was already on American soil, processed through security protocols that turned him from a captured foreign president into defendant number 1 in the Southern District of New York. The global reaction was swift and divided. Brazil's President Lula da Silva called it a grave affront to Venezuela's sovereignty timely and a dangerous precedent. But the legal machinery was already in motion. The Attorney General had signed off on the charges. The precedent established in the 1989 Noriega case was being applied to a sitting foreign president for the first time in modern history. What nobody tells you about transporting a captured foreign leader is that the hardest part isn't the raid, it's the aftermath. Every protocol, every security measure, every legal justification has to work perfectly while the world is watching and half of it is calling you a criminal. As Maduro's transport plane touched down in New York, Latin American capitals were lighting up with emergency meetings. Border guards were being reinforced. Repatriate diplomatic channels were burning with protests and threats. The 30-minute raid had triggered a diplomatic earthquake that would reshape hemispheric relations. But the American system had worked exactly as designed. The forcible abduction doctrine, crafted in 1989 and tested in Panama, had been successfully applied to the most audacious capture in modern history. The transport protocols had delivered their target without incident. The legal framework had held. The question now wasn't whether America could reach anyone, anywhere, when its laws were violated. The question was, who would be next? Venezuelan interim leadership scrambled to maintain control as reports of civilian casualties emerged from the raid sites. Military installations that had protected Maduro for years lay in ruins. The speed of the operation had prevented any meaningful resistance, but it had also prevented any meaningful transition of power. Global affairs analysts began speculating immediately. Trump will use this to threaten other recalcitrant allies. One anonymous expert told reporters, and it might actually work. The engineering marvel wasn't just the 150 aircraft or the 30-minute precision strike. It was the seamless integration of military force, legal justification, and diplomatic consequences into a single operation that demonstrated American power on a scale not seen since the invasion of Iraq. As January 2026 progressed, the world began to understand that something fundamental had shifted. The United States had operationalized a doctrine that made foreign titles meaningless when American law enforcement was concerned. Presidents, prime ministers, kings, none of them were beyond reach if they violated American statutes on drugs or terrorism. The transport protocols that moved Maduro from the USS Iwo Jima to a New York courtroom had become a template, a reproducible system, a machine that could be activated whenever the Attorney General signed the papers and the President gave the order. That machine was now active, tested, and waiting for its next assignment. The courtroom in Lower Manhattan, where Maduro would face trial, had been quietly prepared for months. Federal marshals installed additional security screening. The building's ventilation system was upgraded with sensors that could detect chemical threats. Every entrance was equipped with biometric scanners that could identify individuals, even if they attempted to disguise their appearance. This level of preparation wasn't unusual for high-profile terrorism cases. What was unprecedented was applying it to a sitting foreign president who had been forcibly abducted from his own country. The legal mechanics of Maduro's transport revealed the true scope of America's forcible abduction capability. The 1989 opinion authored by Bill Barr hadn't just authorized the Noriega operation. It had created a permanent legal framework that could be activated whenever the Attorney General determined that foreign leaders posed a direct threat to American security through drug trafficking or terrorism. That framework required specific procedural steps that most Americans never see. The Transportation Security Administration had to certify that normal extradition procedures were impossible or ineffective. The State Department had to document that diplomatic solutions had been exhausted. The Defense Department had to confirm that military action could be conducted without excessive risk to American personnel. All three certifications had been completed months before the first aircraft launched toward Venezuelan airspace. The flight path from the USS Iwo Jima to New York followed corridors established during the Cold War for transporting the most sensitive intelligence assets. The aircraft never entered civilian air traffic control. It was guided by military controllers who maintained communication with NORAD, the Pentagon, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation simultaneously. Inside the aircraft, Maduro remained blindfolded and restrained according to protocols originally designed for transporting captured terrorists. But unlike previous high-value targets, Maduro retained certain diplomatic protections even after his capture. He was entitled to medical care, regular meals, and protection from physical abuse. His wife received the same protections in a separate compartment. These protections weren't motivated by humanitarian concerns. They were motivated by legal necessity. Any evidence of mistreatment could compromise the drug trafficking and terrorism charges that justified the entire operation. The landing at a secure military airfield outside New York triggered the final phase of transport protocols that had been rehearsed dozens of times with stand-in personnel. Armored vehicles moved Maduro from the aircraft to a motorcade that included decoy vehicles, electronic warfare equipment, and counter-sniper teams positioned along the route. The entire journey from aircraft to federal courthouse took 47 minutes. Every second was recorded by cameras that would become evidence in the legal proceedings that would determine whether the forcible abduction doctrine could withstand international legal challenges. By the time Maduro appeared before a federal magistrate for his initial hearing, the precedent was already established. Foreign presidents could be captured, transported, and prosecuted in American courts if they violated American laws. The only limiting factor was America's willingness to deploy the necessary military force. That willingness had been demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt. The broader implications extended far beyond Venezuela's borders. Intelligence agencies across Latin America began conducting urgent assessments of their own leaders' vulnerability to similar operations. Military planners studied the Venezuelan raid to understand how 150 aircraft could be assembled and deployed without triggering effective countermeasures. The answer was both simple and terrifying. American military superiority had reached a level where medium-sized nations couldn't mount meaningful resistance against determined American action. The logistical capability that moved 15,000 troops and 150 aircraft into position for a 30-minute raid represented a quantum leap in power projection. As January 2026 drew to a close, the world was still processing the implications of what had occurred. Maduro sat in federal custody awaiting trial on charges that could result in life imprisonment. Venezuela struggled under interim leadership while neighboring countries reinforced their borders and reviewed their security arrangements. The transport machine that had delivered Maduro to American justice remained fully operational. The legal framework that justified his capture remained in effect. The military capability that overwhelmed Venezuelan defenses remained deployed and ready for additional missions. This is where the story stands today. The 30-minute raid succeeded. The transport protocols worked flawlessly. The legal justifications held under initial scrutiny, but the long-term consequences of demonstrating that foreign presidents can be captured and transported like common criminals are still unfolding. What we've witnessed isn't just a successful military operation. It's the emergence of a new form of international law enforcement that places American domestic security above traditional concepts of sovereignty and diplomatic immunity. The precedent has been set. The capability has been proven. The machinery is in place for future operations that most of the world still considers unthinkable. We're living through a fundamental shift in how global power operates. Understanding these operations, these capabilities, and these legal frameworks isn't just fascinating, it's essential for comprehending the world we're inheriting. That's what we do here. We break down the machinery, the protocols, and the implications that shape our reality while most people are still reading headlines. If you want this level of analysis on every major development that changes how power works in our world, make sure you're subscribed. This story isn't over, and the next chapter might be even more unprecedented than what we've just witnessed.